Okay, so staying safe on the water, workshop on wind, waves, and tides. And if at any point you start have any questions and not able to hear or whatever, just throw a message into chat. I think I'll be able to see that. I'm going to be looking off to the right because that is where my screen is. But yeah, I can see messages. Okay, so staying safe on the water. We're going to start with what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about wind. Really important, especially if any of you who have paddled on lakes with high trees around them and mountains around them. When that wind picks up, it just funnels down them, and suddenly it can be really hard to paddle because it's blowing us in a direction we don't want to go. So we really need to understand winds, some of the characteristics of how wind behaves in different environments, and making sure we understand what's in the forecast before we go out. Waves, so understanding how wind speed, duration, and distance affects waves. So wind creates wind waves. All sorts of things create waves, but we're going to focus primarily on wind waves, which are created when wind comes up. And tides, what creates tides, just so you have an idea of what's going on, because I think if I know why, it's kind of cooler for me at least. So I like to share that. And why is it important to us for us to check tide tables? In the touring course, we talk more about currents, we talk more about planning. So it gets more involved. Here it's going to be more about thinking about it from the point of view of probably day paddles. Okay. Oop, wrong way. So this is an old picture of me and Buddy, who was just here a second ago. So tiny bit about me. I started in tech a long time ago. When I lived in Ontario, I ran a company called London SUP, teaching people to paddle. We did SUP yoga. We were nestled in between 3 of the Great Lakes, so spent a lot of time on reservoirs, flat water reservoirs, learning, and then going to the lakes and having fun. Excuse me, so you will see some references to Ontario in here, just because familiarity. I've been in Vancouver about 8 years, and I've been teaching people advanced, basic teaching. I started teaching through other companies like Windshire, Bowen Island Sea Kayak, and then eventually started teaching for myself. And so now under West Coast SUP. And I've been a Paddle Canada instructor. So Paddle Canada is the main certifying body in Canada for recreational paddling. So I've been an instructor for 12 years, taught yoga for 10 years, and teach first aid as well. Okay, so diving into wind. So wind, I always start with a compass because not everyone's familiar with the compass and the layout. Most people are, but just to also think about it from the point of view of how we use it and how we label things. So you're probably all familiar with north, south, east, west at the 45-degree mark. So halfway between north and east is northeast, halfway between south and east is southeast. So this all becomes relevant when we start looking at wind forecasts, because they're always going to have a direction associated with them. And how we label wind is often different than, or is different than, how we often think about our relationship to moving. And just to break that down a little bit more. So I've got a lot of little pictures of this guy standing in Jericho Beach. So here, when we're labeling the direction, when we're walking somewhere or when we're going somewhere or driving somewhere, we often label, the direction we're going. So if we're here at Jericho Beach and we're heading straight over or straight out, we're essentially heading north. If I was to head downtown, I'm heading east. So seems very obvious, I'm sure. But when it comes to labeling weather, it's the opposite. Instead of labeling where it's going, we label where it's come from. So if we look at the next slide, you can see here we have wind. So this is Burrard Inlet, English Bay, downtown, and then Jericho. I was doing a lot of paddling at Jericho area when I created this the presentation, so we have a lot of references there. So here, if the wind is coming, the very typical direction that wind comes from, which is out of the west, it's blowing straight downtown. That wind would be called a westerly, or labeled out of the west. So if you went to the Weather Network or to your favorite weather app and it said 15 kilometers an hour west, it means that wind is blowing from west to east. So it's important to know that Otherwise, when you're looking at the forecast, you get the wind wrong, the direction wrong. And we need to know the direction because we need to know that for planning which direction we're going to paddle. Where are the waves going to come from? So it's important to get that piece down. And so yeah, the example down here, wind blowing at 11 kilometers from the west, might also be called a westerly. If it's coming out of the east, sometimes it's called an easterly, northerly, southerly, but always keep in mind that it's the direction it's coming from. Super important. And labeling the direction of the wind. So here is just a screenshot of the weather network from probably a long time ago. If you look at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, so this section right here. So 3 o'clock, the wind will be at 11 kilometers an hour west, meaning it's coming out of the west, blowing east. So we have wind here at 11 kilometers an hour, and we have the wind gust, which is 15 kilometers an hour. So wind is that constant wind that's blowing. So when you're standing outside and you just have that constant breeze blowing by you, that's what's represented by the wind speed. And here on the weather network, it's labeled in kilometers per hour. The gust is, you know, when you're outside and the wind suddenly gets a little bit stronger and then dies back. That's the gust. So it's important to have a look at both of those. The 11 kilometers an hour west is the main one we really need to know because that's the one that's going to be impacting us all the time. The 15 kilometers an hour is going to impact us sometimes. So it's good to know because if that's 25, we know that sometimes we're going to be standing still or blowing backwards as opposed to always having to deal with the 11. So key takeaways here are noting that it's labeled for the direction the wind is coming from. And the two types and the two speeds we're looking at is wind and wind gust. And if we look at the overall report, it says here, also worth noting, the wind is expected to drop as evening comes on. So at 3 o'clock, we're 11 kilometers an hour. It peaks, comes up a little bit higher at 4 and 5 p.m. So it goes up to 12. And then it starts dropping right around 7 p.m. So quite often coming up to sunset, it's not unexpected that the wind's going to drop. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But here you can see it's all coming the same direction, except at 8 o'clock, it's starting to shift. So when we're looking at this overall chart here, or when you're looking at the weather network or whatever your app is, you always want to look further out than when you're expecting to be paddling. If you're expecting to be paddling for a couple of hours, you want to look for probably 4 to 6 hours way past when you're going to be out there. Number one, because what if something goes wrong and you end up being out there later? But it also gives you an idea of the trends of when's the wind going to start building, when's the wind going to start dropping, and also key is the wind expected to change direction? Because if it's going to change direction, that's going to affect potentially your paddle plan and where you want to be at certain periods of time. Because if you paddle against the wind the whole way one way so that you get the free ride home and then realize that, oh, the wind just changed speed and now you got to paddle into the wind all the way back, it's not very desirable. So we got to keep all of those things in mind. And we want to see further out to make sure we're really prepared, further out than we're expecting to be there, just in case. So you're going to hear me use the word prepared and preparedness a lot because that's how we stay safe. So units. So we saw on the weather network. Weather network we usually use when we're going to be going outside. It's more of a terrestrial kind of thing. We're out on land. We're driving somewhere. It uses units like kilometers per hour. You know, ones we're used to, familiar with driving the car. Quite often in marine environments, or pretty much always in marine environments, instead of kilometers per hour, we use knots. So knots is two things. It's a measure of distance, but it's also a measure of speed. So when you are looking at some apps, I'll show you the Jericho Sailing Center here at one point, they give wind speed in knots. So another component to be very aware of. When you are looking at wind speeds, you need to understand what the units are. Otherwise, you could be expecting something very different than you're going to get. So wind will often be reported in kilometers per hour and forecasts or apps that aren't marine specific. Kilometers per hour is easy to recognize by more folks and is our standard for measuring speed over land. Marine forecasts, marine apps, you're more often than not going to see knots. And so if you get knots and you're more familiar with kilometers, convert it. If you are familiar with knots, then leave it as knots. You can see here, so I just use Google, convert 11 kilometers an hour to knots, and it gives me 11 kilometers per hour is roughly 5.9 knots. So it's not very accurate, but generally, the rule of thumb we use is if you're given knots, double it. Doubling it will give you approximately, the kilometers per hour. So you can see here it's not quite right. 5.9 doubled isn't 11. It's more like in the 12-ish range, but it's close enough for what we need. So if it's in knots, double it, and that's going to give you kilometers per hour. And you can see here that if you're looking at an app and it says, hey, the wind's going to be 8 knots, that doesn't seem so bad if we're thinking kilometers per hour. But when we convert it, it's really 16 kilometers per hour. And now in our real life, when we go out paddling, it starts feeling very different than we expected and might start feeling a little sketchy. So really important to get those units down. So we've talked about direction the wind blows. We label it by the direction it's coming from. Important to know the speed changes to give us an idea of what to expect when we're out there. And really important to be looking at the units of wind measure to make sure that we have a good point of reference as to what we're going to expect to see. So yeah, Jericho Sailing Center. If you go to Government Canada Marine Forecast, they're all going to be in knots. So you can see here, this is an old graph here, but this is basically what you'll find on the Jericho Sailing Center website. You can see here the wind is 8.7 knots, which is quite significant, especially for a new paddler. So we're in the, 17-ish kilometers per hour. That's a fair bit of wind. And if it's been blowing a while, it's going to make some waves. So it's important to get it right. If you go to the Government Canada Marine Forecast, tons of good information there. I'm not going to talk too much about it today, but it's great, especially if we're going to be in Howe Sound, bigger areas. It's used more for marine traffic, especially tankers, ocean-going vessels. It'll give us warnings, wind warnings. It'll give us buoy-specific data. So there's buoys throughout the ocean and locally, and you can click on a little buoy marker on that website and it'll tell you what's the waves doing, what's the wind doing, what are the height of the waves, all sorts of cool things. So depending where you're going, it can be a resource too. Mostly though, urban setting, if you're staying in the city, lower mainland, main areas, Weather Network or your favorite app is an okay go-to to start, but also show you Windy, which is my preferred app. And one more component to talk about. So we know that wind is going to affect us. We know that when we're paddling and we're standing on the paddleboard, the wind picks up. We might be paddling as hard as we can, and we're not going anywhere. So we know that the wind can make it hard to get to where we want to go. If we had made the mistake of paddling with the wind at our back and we thought we were rock stars because we're the fastest paddlers in the world, and then we turn around and realize that it's going to be really hard to paddle back, that's a problem. So we have to understand that concept of where's the wind coming from in relation to where we're going and start considering some of the risk associated with that. So I do a lot of my intro lessons, Alder Bay, which is just behind Granville Island, because it's always flat, really easy to stand, really easy to turn. People have a lot of success there. And if we want a bit more of a challenge, we go into the False Creek and we can pick up some wind, we can pick up some chop and challenge some different things. But when it gets really windy, so False Creek is just this area down in here, bottom right. But if it gets really windy coming out of the west, that wind just wails and whistles down False Creek and gets super, super strong. So what I'm always talking to my students about is if you come out into False Creek and you paddle towards Science World at the end, you're going to get there in about 10 minutes. But the strength of that wind that's blowing down there, when you turn around and come back, that might take you 2 hours. So really, really important to understand the direction the wind's coming from. And when we look at the concept of onshore, offshore, it's kind of looking at that same thing. Which direction do I want? Which direction is going to be the hard direction? And what do I have to be cautious of when I'm picking the route that I'm going? So for here, this guy standing here at Jericho Beach, if the wind was blowing from, say, West Van over to Jericho Beach, so it's coming out of the north, this side here, we consider that from the point of reference of where he's standing, an onshore breeze, because the wind is blowing from the water onshore. So that's the safest type of wind, because if you paddle straight out, you might be battling it a little bit, but if you fall off, if you get too tired, you're eventually going to blow back to shore. Might not be where you started, but you're blowing back to shore. So onshore is the safest. Offshore is here. If the wind is coming out of the south and blowing towards West Van, that's an offshore breeze. So in that situation, we have to be more mindful of where we are. Especially when we get excited, we're hanging out with friends, and often when we're new paddlers too, our environmental awareness isn't always spot on yet. It takes a bit to get used to where are we right now on the water. And what can happen here is as we're paddling, if we start paddling out and the wind's at our back, well, we have that rock star moment where we think we're going really fast, and then we turn around and we have a hard time coming back. Wind picks up even more, we might not be able to paddle against it, and we're just going to keep getting blown out further and further and further. So it's important to understand the direction of the wind and where it's going to take us. In that scenario, I would paddle parallel to shore and keep an eye on shore and make sure that I wasn't slowly being blown out. Because even though we're trying to stay close to shore, if that wind is strong enough or we're not paying attention, we might not be paddling straight across. We might be generally paddling out. So our environmental awareness has to be a little bit more spot on to make sure that we're not being blown out as we think we're blowing straight or we're paddling straight. And last one here, southeast. So wind is tending towards, coming out of the southeast, tending towards the northwest. If we started here, that's going to be more of an offshore as well. So if I'm paddling out, it's just going to be blowing me out, even worse case, up into Howe Sound maybe. So it's important if we're using a relationship or talking in relation to the shore, we talk about it as onshore, offshore, but it's that same concept that we always have to be reevaluating is where's the wind coming from? Where is it going to blow me if I'm not careful? And especially in relationship to where do I want to be going? So if we're going in a specific destination, we have to plan a route that's going to get us there. So if we had the scenario where we had a southerly wind blowing us straight north, and I wanted to go to Sunset Beach, and I want to paddle straight over this way, the wind is going to tend to want to take me this way. So I'm going to have to be super careful, and I'm probably going to hug the shore. It's going to be a longer route to get there. I'm going to hug the shore to try and catch little bits of break from the wind so that I don't blow out. So I'm going to adjust my course to make sure that the wind doesn't take me where I don't want to go. Okay, so we've got wind speed. We label it from the direction it's coming from. We have what did we have last time? What were we feeling? Oh yeah, units. We had knots and kilometers per hour, and then we also have the consideration of where's the wind going to take us if we're not careful, especially if the wind's going to be picking up speed. So all of these things, there's things that we want to start having rolling around on our heads when we're planning where we're going to go, and also being mindful when we're out there of our conditions changing, and I have to adjust my plan. Now, another consideration is how the wind interacts with the environment around us. If the wind is just blowing straight in through Burrard Inlet here, and it's just blowing straight through the inlet, it's going to go in the direction that it wants to go. But we know that Stanley Park has a lot of trees. We have a lot of big buildings downtown. So the wind's not going to blow straight across them. The wind always takes the path of least resistance. So when it starts hitting this area here, it's going to peel off and go under Lionsgate, or it's going to come wailing down False Creek. So we have to keep in mind that land contours will change the direction of the wind. And as it goes down False Creek, it's not just blowing across Stanley Park because the trees are blocking it. It's not just blowing across downtown because the buildings are blocking it. So the path is being changed so it's being redirected. So if you've ever paddled at a deep cove out into the channel that would go, north up Indian Arm, if you've ever hit there on a hot day around 1 o'clock, the wind is just howling north. And if you get caught in it, it's going to want to take you north, and it's going to be really hard to paddle back. The reason for that is, if we look at Indian Arm, it is a straight fjord that goes up with height on the side. So once that wind hits it, it just blows straight down it. So it's not going to go anywhere except the path of least resistance. Alouette Lake is another example of that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of one. False Creek definitely has that effect. So anywhere where we have high sides and a length of water, that wind is going to pick up speed and it's going to go faster. So land contours are important to consider. They can make it harder to paddle because of wind, or they might create an opportunity to get out of the wind. So we'll look at that as well. So when we look at that direction that the wind is blowing, good to know. Wind often drops towards sunset. Wind often changes direction midday. So if you've been out paddling in the morning, wind often switches from an offshore to an onshore in the evening, and vice versa at the peak of the day. It blows more onshore at the height of the day and switches to more of an offshore at the towards the end of the day. If you paddle out of Jericho by 10, 11 o'clock, if it's going to be a hot day, that wind's pretty much howling. If you're out in the morning, you can probably start to feel it building around 9, 10 o'clock, and it's not going to drop till about 5. By 7 o'clock, perfect place to go see a sunset because it's flattening out. So if we start wrapping some of these things together into a couple of scenarios. So back to Jericho, standing on the beach here, and you can see I've labeled, we have a 15 km/h wind blowing out of the southwest, which means it's blowing northeast. So if we had a temperature of 25 degrees, we had wind at 15 km/h out of the southwest, and a wind gust of 25 km/h. And the gust is always the same direction as the wind, so it's usually not labeled direction. What can we expect? 15 is almost the top of very, very beginner paddler. It's getting pretty challenging at that point. So we know now that 25 is also going to be really tricky, especially if we're paddling into it. More so if we're paddling with it at our back, it's just going to make us fly further than we might want to go. So in this scenario, 25 degrees Celsius, 15 southwest, gusting at 25, we can expect fairly strong wind with strong gusts. Wind out of the southwest is going to be more of an offshore breeze, tending to move us away from shore. So we're going to have to be very conscious to stay as close to shore as possible and being mindful that we're not being blown out as we think we're blowing straight. So another scenario. Oh, no, that was it. I'm going to show you, we're going to wrap some more of these into waves. I want to show you the Jericho Sailing Center real quick. If you're not familiar with it and you paddle anywhere as a Jericho, Locarno Beach, Spanish Banks, it's a great website to use as a resource. So Jericho Sailing Center is the sailing center close to Jericho Beach. They have weather measurement devices right on the roof. So anytime we look at the forecast, it's projected what it's going to be. It's not what's actually happening. But if we go to the Jericho Sailing Center up here and go to under weather and webcam, we can go to current conditions right now. And this shows you exactly what's happening right now. So if I was going to Jericho, this is what I would be looking at in the morning, an hour before I go, and then immediately before I get in the car to go. It tells us what's the current wind speed. Current wind speed, 6.1 knots. So in that 12-ish km/h range. It's coming out of the northwest. So it's coming out of the northwest, blowing southeast, more of an onshore-ish breeze. And 10-minute average of wind speed is 3.5. So 6.1 is probably a gust if the average wind speed has been 3.5. So that tells me that 3.5 is not too bad. That's 6, 7 km/h. I can do that. If it's gusting to 12, I'm fine with that too. And it gives me an idea of the direction. So when I get there, I know I'm going to paddle west first. and then come back going east, because that's the way the wind's going to be trying to take me. So we can get a ton of information of what's happening right now, which is always more valuable than just the overall report. We need both, but if we can get current, it's great. You also have the webcam, so you can see what does the water actually look like before you get there. We usually have a webcam. Don't tell me it's down. Nope. Usually there's a webcam here. So it rotates around and shows you what are the actual water conditions. So you can actually go there, have a look to see how choppy does it look. And then that kind of helps you decide where you might want to go. So really valuable resource. All right, back into presentation. Okay, so a whole bunch on wind. And so we know that we need to know about wind because wind is going to affect us when we're paddling. We react like big sails when we're on the paddleboard. But wind, if it's blowing long enough over the water for fast enough, it's also going to make waves. So we also need to know the wind because we also need to know what's the chances of there being wave action, because that might change our mind on where we want to go. Or it just might give us the idea that, hey, there's a higher chance that I'm going to fall in, so I want to dress for it. So when we look at waves, there's all sorts of different types of waves, all sorts of things that make waves. But in general, a wave is going to have a direction associated with it, the direction those waves are moving. You're going to have a height of the wave, which is called the crest, and then the trough is the bottom of the wave. So waves always kind of go in a pattern like this. The height of the wave is the difference between the crest and the trough. So some apps, especially Windy, will tell you what are the height of the wave. So it's important that we understand what's being measured when we look at height. So we have a height, we have a trough. You can see here what actually is happening in the waves. It's not just water moving. There's the orbital path of, I'm going to read it because it's easier, orbital path of the individual water molecules at the water surface. So you can see how they rotate. That's what gives the rounding effect of the water. So as these rotate, they also move forward, which moves that wave forward. So the water's not really still. There's action going on inside those waves as it's moving along. And other terms you might come across are wavelengths. So that's the distance between the waves. Generally, you want to understand the length, how the wave period, which is how fast it's going from peak to peak or trough to trough. So you understand what's the speed of the water that's moving and what's the height of those waves. Maybe we can handle 8 inches really easily, but maybe when it gets up to a meter, it's feeling a little scary, so we don't want to go. So we need to understand these terms when we start looking at some of the apps. So like I mentioned, different things make waves. Tides coming and going can make swells. Water's moving. That's more over here on the right-hand side, swell waves. Boats will go through the water and they create wake. Wake, once it kind of flattens out, will be more like swells. It's the energy from that boat moving through, displacing the water, turns into these swells moving. So we're going to be faced with those. We're going to see boats coming and know that, hey, I might want to go on my knees, or maybe I want to stay standing. But when we're looking at wind, specifically in the forecast, when we're planning where we want to go, what we want to wear, one of the main things we're after is wind waves, or looking for is wind waves. Wind waves, as soon as that wind starts blowing, it can create a little bit of a ripple. It can create more chop. The stronger it blows, the longer it blows, more energy is transferred into the water, and those waves might get bigger. Benefit of the wind wave is as soon as the wind stops, they start dropping. So it's important for us to have an idea as to how fast is the wind going to be blowing, how long is it blowing, and how far across the water it has blown, because the further it blows across, the bigger the chance of waves. Fetch is the measure of distance across the water. So fetch, the longer the fetch, the more energy is transferred, the bigger the chance of wave, or the waves are going to get bigger. So fetch is the area of the ocean or lake surface over which wind blows in an essentially consistent direction, thus generating waves. Term is also used as a synonym for fetch length, which is the horizontal distance. So I usually think of more from the distance point of view, because I want to know how long has that wind been blowing. So if I go back to some of the slides that we looked at before, if we have Burrard Inlet here, if that wind has originated way out here and blown all the way in through Burrard Inlet to English Bay, that's a long distance. The fetch there is quite long. And that's why if that wind has been blowing strong all afternoon, when you go to Sunset Beach by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's just a ton of waves, and that is not a good place to go paddleboarding, because everything ends up there, and that wind has been blowing fast over that long distance and building like crazy. And if you're not familiar with what the fetch is, check the forecast, see what the speed is, go to Google Maps and see how does that relate to the environment around me. Google Maps becomes a great reference for, what is the distance? So I'll go back to where I left off here. So fetch. Importance, wind speed. The higher the wind speed, the longer the fetch, the longer it's been blowing, the bigger the waves. So if it's been blowing for 3 days, it's going to be a mess. If it's been blowing for 2 hours, it's going to calm down pretty quick. And also how waves interact with shore, how they interact with when they hit objects underneath the water. We saw that kind of spiraling on the previous video, the previous slide, where the waves are made from the spiraling as it progresses across the water. Wind waves often move in the same direction of the wind, but if the wind's switching a lot, it might not correlate. But when you get close to shore and you get where the waves start breaking, and it can be very, very messy, it might look really intimidating. That's not always a good measure of what the experience is going to be once you get past them. When the water starts hitting the bottom of the ocean here, or the bottom of the lake bed, that energy that's spinning has to go somewhere. So it starts shifting and becoming waves with that eventually start breaking. And then we get the big mess here. You can see down here on the bottom slide, you have all these little energy circles that as the land contours upwards, that energy has to go somewhere. So it goes up as high as it can, and then it starts rounding over and becomes breaking waves. So when we're on the beach and we're looking at these breaking waves, that might look like a big intimidating mess. But if we can get past them, maybe we get out to gentle rollers, which can be not so bad. So that starts affecting us, especially when we're launching and landing. If we were leaving from Jericho going to English Beach or English Bay, and the wind's been blowing quite a bit for a very long time over that long distance, we know there's going to be a lot of chop there, a lot of wave action, and we know it's going to be breaking hard at shore. So it's going to be trickier to get off of our board. Probably really easy to get on the board, but tricky to get off. And same concept of energy goes somewhere, or how the energy moves in the water. As energy goes up when the lake bed comes up, the depth of where we are will also affect the types of waves that we get. So someplace that's shallow, and here's my Ontario reference, these are the Great Lakes. I used to paddle Lake Erie a lot, shallowest lake out of all of them. So wind waves are created quite quick because energy transfers into the water and builds waves really fast because there's not a lot of water to move. And then the wind dies and it drops really quick. Lake Huron and Superior, on the other hand, are very deep lakes, lots of water in here. So the wind has to blow longer, much longer, to transfer enough energy into the water to be able to get those wind waves blowing. But the flip side of it is once all that energy has transferred into the water, it stays there. So after the wind drops, those big areas, they hold the energy longer, so the waves stay longer. So I just threw this in here because there's different concepts that we can kind of look at, or that we can look at, that we can think about when we are trying to decide what might the waves be doing. And as I'm going through all of this, it's a lot of knowledge, it's a lot of bits and pieces, maybe some of it you already have, but the picture that we're starting to draw in our head is based on the wind that's happening, based on the environment around us, based on how long that wind's been blowing, the depth of the water, potentially where we are, what might we expect to see when we get there? And how long might that last? And you might think, I don't know how deep the different areas are. There's ways to find that out as well. And sometimes local knowledge is the best. So these are all things that can start affecting our paddling experience. And often I hear people saying, you know, well, if it's blowing that hard, I'm just not going to go out. I just won't go. But as you get more experience and you go out paddling, you're feeling more comfortable on the board, you're going to want to challenge more challenging situations. You're going to want to go out to places that have a bit more challenge, at least sometimes. So it's not always going to be, well, I just won't go. And there's always the risk of you might get yourself out there and find yourself in it. So being prepared, understanding how to handle it, being in a group, and understanding even the potential that it might be something that happens is just good information to have. All right, contours. So we talked a little bit about path of least resistance. That wind is going to blow through open areas and keep blowing. It's also going to follow contours. So when it hits downtown, those buildings, it's either going to peel off and go down Falls Creek and whale down there, or it's going to find its way under Lionsgate Bridge because those are the paths of least resistance. That's because we need to keep in mind where's the wind going to be going. But here, we can also consider how the land and contours on the land create shelter points. So this is Jericho Beach over here to the right. This is actually the sailing center here. This is the Jericho Pier. I've taught a lot of lessons in this area when that wind is just howling in the afternoon. And we basically just get over towards the pier here and sit here because the wind is always coming out of the west, which is this direction. And the pier gives us a windbreak. So we get out of the wind and we can have a fine lesson. And you can see all these little areas create little windbreaks. This is why Jericho Beach is generally more calmer than Spanish Banks, which is just broad and open. So again, we can start using Google Maps for trying to decide where we might find these in areas. So if we know that there's a potential for strong wind, we know that there's a potential for waves, we want to start looking at where's our shelter points where we can take little breaks, have some water, have a snack, chat before we keep on going. And contour, so yeah, this is just Falls Creek again. High on the sides, that wind's just going to come straight down here. Other things that affect the wind, especially in Falls Creek, but also many places. Other things that are going to affect it are man-made objects. These big, high supports on Burrard Street Bridge, they create a funneling effect. So that wind is narrowed down again even more as it goes through here. That'll create more waves and chop right under the bridge. It can make it a little bit more challenging to paddle through, especially if you're familiar with the area at all. All these boats come in and out, and they make waves that start bouncing back and forth between the bases of the bridge. So it gets quite choppy. You call it a washing machine. It's just coming at you from all directions. So land can give us shelter, and land can also create, or features can also start creating barriers for us. So coming through here can be quite challenging. This is can be, yeah, I think so. Yeah, this is Canby Street Bridge. So has similar effect, not the same height, but very similar. This is one out of Ontario. This is Lake Erie. So this direction here would be southwest, or sorry, we often get it southwesterly there. It hits the pier here and it becomes a big mess. But on the other side of it, we know that we can go over to Little Beach and have a really nice clean paddle. So Google Maps, understanding where the wind's coming, starts painting a picture of, hey, I want to go out. This isn't a good place because I just looked at the weather report, but I know if I go over here, I'm probably going to be out of it. Now, starting to wrap some of these concepts together. All right, scenario. Back at Jericho, we have 25 degrees, so it's a warm day. 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, the forecast is 25 kilometers an hour out of the west, gusting at 35. Not a good day to go paddling out of the Jericho Sailing Center at 1:30 in the afternoon. Not even going to try it. Way, way, way too wavy. That's going to be blowing waves. There's going to be white caps. It's just the kiters will be out. The wing people, the guys using the wings, they're all going to be out. When we see them, we take a break. But at 6:30, that wind's expected to drop down to 5 kilometers out of the west, gusting at 10. Much more manageable. So that was our forecast, and we're planning on going paddling at 7:30 in the evening. So what are we going to expect? Very much so, with what we're seeing there, the drop, even though the fetch is quite long, that's a significant drop from 25 kilometers an hour west to 5. By 7:30, it's going to be dropping even more. So we're probably going to be okay. We can expect that midday there was going to be lots of wind generating wave activity through the area. It's going to look like a significant mess. English Beach is going to be wavy as anything, but at 7:30, winds are dropping, and it's going to be calm. So our plan was look throughout the day to see what's going on, get an idea of what the winds are creating on the water, and and then pick our paddling time. 6:30 might be okay. 7:30 is going to be better. And this also is a place, this awesome sunsets when you paddle out there. Another scenario. All right, so weather temperature is 25 degrees. Again, 1:30 in the afternoon. We have 15-kilometer-hour winds out of the south, gusting to 25 kilometers an hour. We're planning on paddling at 2. So we know 15, fairly high, gusting at 25. We're going to have to be pretty cautious. That's going to create some chop. That's going to create some ripple that might make paddling more challenging. If it's been blowing since even earlier or the day before, then we know that potentially there's going to be even more waves. So at 2 o'clock when we plan to go, what would our paddle plan be? 2 o'clock, what we're seeing is an offshore wind. If we're launching from Jericho, that wind is going to try to blow us out into the middle of Burrard Inlet. So with the wind coming out of the south, fetch will be small. So the fetch isn't very big because it's starting on shore where we are launching from. Downside of that is without fetch, we probably don't have any waves there. So sometimes we're lulled into that false sense of security that, hey, it's really calm. But as soon as you start going farther out and that fetch builds, then we start getting the waves. So what we're going to expect is probably not a lot of wave action right at shore. But it is an offshore breeze, so we're going to have to be very cautious. Doesn't mean we can't go out. We're just going to hug the shore and make sure we stay close to shore as we paddle parallel to it. And one more, onshore breeze, so 15 kilometers an hour out of the north, which is going to be blowing us back to shore. So same scenario, 25 degrees, 1:30 p.m., 15 kilometers an hour out of the north, that should be, not west, gusting to 25 and going paddling at 2 o'clock. So we're probably going to have a lot of wave action because the fetch is a little bit longer. The longer that fetch is coming from the north side of the inlet over to the south side, we're going to get more wave action. So it's going to be pretty choppy and messy right at shore. Doesn't mean we can't go, because once we get past it, it might flatten out a little bit. But the wind is going to be constantly trying to blow us back to shore. So it's an onshore breeze. Paddling out was going to be a challenge. We'll be paddling into the wind or likely over chop at shore. But we're going to go out a little further and then decide where we're going to paddle. We might paddle parallel, or we might just paddle straight north towards West Van and then turn around and come back, because it's going to be a harder paddle out, but then we get the free ride back. So it doesn't mean we don't go out. We're just taking what we know and understanding where the risks are of onshore, offshore, and then making our decisions for the paddle plan from there. Hopefully I haven't turned your minds to jelly yet. One last one. So this is talking about fetch again, distance over the water. And we're back to Ontario here. Yes, it's a lot of information. That's why you're going to get a recording to come back to it. Even if you only, like any class, if you take away 5% of it and you remember 10% of it 2 days from now, you're further ahead than you were later on if it's new knowledge. So last one here. Weather forecast, Port Stanley, Ontario. This is a big popular beach. I'm originally from London, Ontario, so southwestern Ontario. So that's kind of one of the go-tos if you live in the south end of the city. 25 degrees again, probably be even hotter there. Probably 95% humidity. 1:30 p.m. Winds 15 degrees out of the southwest. Gusting at 25. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner here, this is a picture of Lake Erie, and you can see a southwesterly wind runs a big amount of fetch for that lake. So it dumps a ton of wavy water right at that beach. So midday when that wind builds, the main beach area here can be a pretty big gong show. But knowing that, we're going to go to Little Beach because it's going to be calm because we got a wind break from the pier and from this chunk of land here, and we get a big break there. But we know that it's going to be an onshore, so if we do paddle out, we're going to blow back. We know that because of the speed and the fetch, it's going to be pretty wavy. So we probably wouldn't go to Main Beach unless we want to try playing in the waves, which can be quite fun. You might get beat up a little bit, thrown down a little bit, but it's also a really good way to build confidence on the board and reset your expectations of what you can do. So more of an onshore wind, paddling out from Main Beach will be extremely choppy. Suggest going to Little Beach. So all of these things, I know it's probably starting to feel like a bit of repetition, but it's the same concepts, just looking at it in different places. And as we keep coming back to those same concepts over and over and over again, it becomes that muscle memory, and you just start applying it on your own. You get to the point where you look at the weather forecast, you think of where you're going, and you got to plan in a couple of minutes. All right, tides. So with tides, there's a lot to know about tides. There's tide tables, which tell you tide heights. There's tides create currents. Currents create at a narrowing area, currents get faster. There's a lot to consider as we start going into potentially more challenging areas or areas where there's higher tidal exchanges. So I'm going to go over a couple concepts here that you can start applying right away when you start thinking about challenges with that tides might introduce to your paddling. Mostly, it's going to be launching and landing. If the tide goes way out at Spanish Banks and it's a really low tide, if you're out on the water, chances are you have to walk a kilometer back in across really sloppy sand, dragging your board because that tide goes out really, really far. So you got to watch the tides because you don't want to get caught out there. Boundary Bay, there's a number of places where tides can create big challenges getting in and out. The other thing is tides create currents, and currents will affect us. If the tide is coming in and we're paddling against it and there's a lot of current, we're going to have to work twice as hard. So we might have wind. Now we have wind that's going to affect us, and we have tides that can affect us. The current that can affect us. So with tides, I just want to give enough here to get you thinking about what might create more current than not, so that you can understand we want to look at tides and the weather when we're trying to decide where we want to go. All right, let's just jump into it. So tides, first of all, tides are caused by gravitational pull of the moon and the sun. Tides are very long, I'm just going to read this, long period waves that move through the oceans in response to the forces exerted by the moon and sun. Tides are actually created by gravity, and it's the water being pulled into ovals and pushed around the globe. So it kind of has the appearance of being one big long wave that's moving, but it's really the water is being pulled away from the planet in different ways depending on how gravity from the sun and the moon are hitting it. There's pictures that explain it much better than I just did. But basically, tides will originate in the oceans and progress towards coastlines where they appear as regular rise and fall of the sea surface. And living close to the ocean, we all know that sometimes the high tides are quite high, and sometimes they're quite low, and sometimes they hardly change at all. When the highest part of the crest of the wave reaches a particular location, high tide occurs. So when we're looking at the waves, we know there's a crest and a trough. Crest is high tide at the beach. The trough of that wave moving back out is low tide. And we have spring tides and we have neap tides. And you don't really need to know this, but I put this in because it's just a bit of information on how they work, which correlates to why sometimes they're higher and why sometimes the differences between them are greater and smaller. So if you look here, a spring tide is anytime there is a new moon, which means you have Earth, moon, sun. So the new moon, that's the full moon we can't see. We can't see it because the sun isn't lighting it up because it's in line with it. So a spring tide is when we have a new moon or a full moon. Full moon is when the moon is on the other side of the planet. Sunlight can hit it, lights it up, so we see the full moon. And you see this oval that's created here. So the oval is basically the ocean's waters being pulled into that, depending where you are in the world, that's a high tide. At the top and the bottom, that's going to be a low tide. So depending on where the moon is, and this is how the moon and the sun work together, anytime it's a new or a full moon, the tidal ranges are going to be greater. And the tidal range is the difference between high and low tide. A neap tide is anytime we have, basically anything in between. So here we would have, basically kind of a quarter moon. And so the gravitational pull of the moon is pulling the oval the other way. So that creates more of a low tide on these right and left sides. So it's the moon rotating around, compounding with the sun's gravitational pull that moves the water, that oval or that shape of the water around the planet, creating the tides. So if we look at a tide table or kind of a graphical representation, so what this is representing is the top peaks are the high tide measure. So if this is 4 meters, this is 6 meters, right around here, we're 5 meters high. And then the next big dip is down to 1 meter. So this is going to be a graph of the tides during spring tide. So the distance between the high and the low is greater. On a neap tide, when we have those, quarter moons, the distance between the high and the low is smaller. So lower tides. So we have a flow between that the moon is taking us through for spring and neap tides. And then within that cycle, we have all the ups and downs of the tides during the day. Tidal periods. So typically in our area, we have 4 tides a day. Sometimes it appears like there's 3 because 2 of them are so close together, they don't look any different. But here we have tidal day, and we go from a high to a low to a high to a low. So typically lower mainland area, we're always going to see 4 different tides. You're going to have 2 highs, and one's going to be a higher high and a lower high. And then you have 2 lows, so the low low and then the low. And here, this picture on the bottom right is just trying to graphically represent the difference between that tidal range. So if high tide is this line here and low tide was this line here, we have a tidal exchange or a tidal range of this much here. On this graph here, this is 3 meters down to -4 meters. That can't be meters. Anyway, the unit. So we have roughly 3.5 down to -4. So that is a difference of 7.5 units. So that's significant. That's a big tidal exchange. This next exchange is, what's that? 1.5 down to 1.5. So that's 3 units difference. So why that starts becoming important to us is every time we go from a high to a low or a low to a high, we're getting current created in the water. The bigger the exchange, the more current we're going to have. The smaller exchange, the lower the current we're going to have. So if you're paddling somewhere, especially if it's an area that narrows, and we have a 5-meter tidal exchange, you are going to feel that. You're going to feel it if you're paddling into it, like you're paddling through molasses, or if you're paddling with it, you're going to feel like a rock star. So we start wanting to take that into consideration, especially if we're going on longer trips or through more challenging areas where we want to make sure we're moving with the tides, and if possible, moving with the winds and timing our day around it. Otherwise, it could just be really hard to paddle. And if you're going out for an hour or two, maybe it doesn't matter as much. Wind becomes more important than tides. But if you're going out for a full day, or you're going on longer distances, and when you start working towards longer distances, and maybe you are already, then we want to start really considering what are the tides doing, because they're going to sap our energy if we're constantly going against it. So tidal exchange, that tidal range, and the tidal exchange from high to low or low to high becomes important. And this is just one more representation. I thought it showed movement, so it made me kind of happy. Flood is when the tide is coming in. You'll hear people talking about flooding. Ebb is when the tide is going out. So if you hear people mentioning the tide is ebbing, it means it's going out. If it's flooding, it's coming in. And here, this is representing the difference between high and low tide again. So here, you can see here on the beach, that's quite a big difference of land that's being exposed. And if we take a quick look here now, look at tideforecast.com. This is Vancouver. So this is today's tide. Tideforecast.com, this is one of the ones that I come to because I like graphical representations. You can select all different areas in BC. I just picked up Vancouver because it's easy. But it gives us a graphical representation, shows us where we are right now with that little red dot, shows us the phases of the moon, so that we know where we are in the moon phase, so we know how that's going to affect us, and tells you basically what's the high and what's the low. So today we had a really big tidal exchange in Vancouver at 3:34 a.m. when we were probably all sleeping, maybe. It was 4.2 meters high. At 11:05 a.m., so later in the morning, we hit the low of 1 meter. So that means that tidal exchange from 3:34 to 11:05 was 3.2 meters. That's a fair bit of an exchange. That would be enough, depending on where we are, to feel the effects of a current. But here you can see right now, we had another high at 6:12, 4.2, so also very high. But the next low is 3.3, so a small exchange. So if we were out paddling now, we're not going to feel very much. And if we go to, tomorrow, I have to refresh. Yep, if we're going to tomorrow, you can see it's going to have something similar again. And so also this chart gives us a really nice representation of how that tidal range is shrinking as we are moving through the week. So handy tool. Gives you sun exposure, or gives you a little bit of a forecast here too. All right, back to the slides. So current can affect us when we're paddling. Current can make it hard to paddle. You could be paddling along and suddenly it feels like you're paddling through oatmeal, molasses. Something's changed. Often it's current. Tides are also going to change our launching, getting in and out of the water. So Spanish Banks here. Here on the left side, this is a low tide, really low tide. You can see how far away. This here is the 1 mile marker, or the 1 marker that's way off the beach there. I've been able to walk to that on a super low tide and be within a couple meters of that. So that's really freaking far. And if you're stuck on this, it's kind of sloppy. If you're dragging a board, it's a significant amount of work. Picking your location for launch is important. This is not a good place to launch if there is going to be a huge tidal exchange while you're out paddling. But Jericho Beach which is just, or Jericho Sailing Center, which is just up the beach a little way, this is their low tide. This is their extreme low tide. So much more manageable. It's only moved this one distance, and that's because the shape of the land, they've also engineered it to make it easier to get in and out. But if you will continue on to Jericho Beach, which is up here, you're also going to see not nearly as much exchange. So understanding the areas is important, and where the point of where the tides are when considering launching and landing. I think the next one I did was Boundary Bay. Yeah, so significant. And some of this is because it's not very deep there. So you're going to have a big tidal exchange. It's not very deep. It's going to come in quite far and go out quite far. The shallower the water, it's actually going to create more current because that water is moving faster in a smaller area. So it is just whipping down. So you can actually run into a situation on a big tidal exchange at Boundary Bay where that water is pulling you out. And it's hard to paddle against because of the amount of current that's being created because of that water rushing out. So considerations. And then tides and summary. So I want to double back a little bit because there's a concept I wanted to talk about that I missed. Where was it? I wanted to talk about the funneling effect that wind has. Let's come back to this one. So in this one, we were talking about wind blowing out of the west towards downtown and coming down False Creek. So I missed talking about it on this slide. There's a principle from maybe grade 9, 10 physics, probably took it, Venturi effect, which is when a fluid moves from a wider pipe to a narrower pipe, or moves from a wider space to a narrower space, pressure drops, but speed increases. So that's why you can find super high wind speeds in areas where that wind's being funneled. So an example is False Creek. This high wind, if we have a lot of wind coming in here, hits the mouth of the creek right under Burrard Street Bridge, narrows down, especially on those steep supports of the bridge, gets pushed narrower, so the wind speed picks up. So if it's, I don't know, 15 kilometers an hour out here, it might be 25 in False Creek because of the narrowing effect. And then we know the path of least resistance is going to take it down faster all the way to Science World at the end. So anytime we have that narrowing effect, we're going to have increased wind speed. So other examples of where we might see that, let's find a map here. You're all familiar with, well, let's see, I'll do Indian Arm. Indian Arm is fjord right here, big fjord. So what happens here is, so we have Burrard Inlet, wind can be blowing down here, whistles around Kate's, and then we have two factors that make Indian Arm super windy. One is we have that wind being narrowed down through that narrow channel, high mountains, trees on the side, path of least resistance. It's speeding up because it's been pushed narrower, and then it's going through the path of least resistance. The other thing that we have that really affects us is convection. Anytime the day is hot, when that land heats up, the air close to the land rises, which pulls a strong offshore wind, which pulls that wind along and then makes it go faster. So what you'll have here is mountains up here heat up, air goes up, and increases that already faster wind speed even more, and it just flies down here. So we have a narrowing effect over path of least resistance, and we have convection pulling that hot air up, making that wind blow across the water stronger. We also have that on Pitt Lake. High sides, runs northwest, heating effect, and that wind's just going to whistle. Stave Lake, Alouette. If you've ever paddled Alouette, If you've ever gone out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a summer day, you know that if this is the main beach here, it's going to want to blow you all the way to the end. And then when you turn around, you are going to be struggling like anything to come back, because you have high sides. Hot day convection means that wind is being narrowed, funneled, and the convection is making it go faster because that hot air is bringing it up. That's also why temperatures, this is terrible. Yeah, yeah. I've heard of different horror stories in Alouette Lake. It's a rough one. It's one that you really got to time, or take a lunch with you and hang out till 5 o'clock. Indian Arm's the same. If you get up there, if you're trying to paddle home from there at 11 o'clock in the afternoon, you're probably not going to get home till 9 at night. You're better off leaving at 5 in the morning or 5 at night. Because what happens is the reverse of that convection. As the sun starts to set, the day cools down, the wind speed starts dropping because that convection isn't happening as much, and things settle more. So that's why early morning and later in the evening are often better, more accessible times to paddle. Doesn't mean you can't do it. We just got to be wise when we're picking when we're going to do it, or plan to stay and have a lunch. That's always an option. So, talked about a ton of stuff. We've talked about wind speed, labeled by the direction it's coming from, how wind can create waves. The longer it blows, the faster it blows, the further across the water it blows, they increase. But wind waves, as the wind starts dropping, waves will start dropping too. There's the added effect of, depending on the depth of water, it can take a little longer. But most of the places that we probably paddle around here, it's not going to be a huge impact, especially if we're on a lake. It's going to drop really, really fast. We looked at how waves travel, how waves move, the characteristics, why they break at shore, because that energy comes up and breaks over. Looks like a choppy mess. Doesn't mean that past that isn't good paddling. So we might want to go anyway. We also looked at onshore, offshore in relation to fetch. When wind is offshore, it's going to want to blow us out. The cautionary story there is, because the fetch is small, the water is not very choppy yet. It hasn't blown across it. So it looks maybe approachable, even though we're feeling wind. Higher risk once we get out there, higher risk because then once we turn around, we have to paddle back into it. So our strategy has to be stay close to land, keep your eye on land to make sure it's not blowing you out. And then with tides, we're looking at that tidal exchange because it's going to create some current. If we're paddling to Indian Arm, we're planning well in advance based on tides and wind. Wind, it really takes, we can be watching it, the forecast for a week, but it's probably going to be the day ahead that we're making some serious decisions as to what are we doing. Tides are predicted years out. It's based on gravity, rotations of moon, planet, or the planet and moon. So you can check those a long ways out. So when we're doing a Granite Falls trip, we've got a couple planned this year. We already know what the tides are going to be. We're going to wait and see what the winds are, but we've already picked our times based on, we know the characteristics of the winds are in that area based on local knowledge. And most of our planning is going to be around avoiding the winds and trying to utilize the tides to help us get there and help us get home so they're not working against us. So all of these things start factoring in that tidal exchange. Can the current help us? Is it going to work against us? Is it going to make it harder to get in, harder to get out? Those are things that we can start considering. And you're not going to remember all of it for sure that we just talked about. You can always review it later. But you'll start noticing now and connecting maybe some dots based on what we've talked here tonight and what you start experiencing when you're out there. And anytime you're out paddling with me, you can ask, where are things? And hey, I'm noticing this, observing this. What do you think? So you can start kind of building that knowledge and comparing. But get into the habit of always checking them. This last template here, this is one I use in my instructor course to teach new instructors what they have to know before they take somebody out for a lesson. I also use a variation of this for the touring course to help us plan. So what I have here is, this is one that I filled out. So I give them a blank one and ask them to fill it out. This helps them with the decision-making process. So what I tell them is I want them to use their tool of choice to find What is the wind speed? You know, whatever unit you want, knot or northwest. What's the direction? What's the gust? What's the air temp? So what's the air temperature we're expecting? And I always throw in cloud cover, because cloud cover in even the middle of summer in Vancouver, if it's a cloudy day and you get wet, you're going to get cold because the sun's not there to warm you up if it's only 20 degrees. But if it's going to be a scorching day or full on sun, you're going to warm up when you get out. So the risk is a little bit lower if you fall in. So these are factors that I tell them to start collecting. And I tell them to hit different time frames. So I want them to write down a line every time the wind speed has a significant change or direction. So we start with five knots out of the north, switches at 8 a.m. to 7 knots out of the west, and then stays 8 and then starts dropping at the end of the day. So they have an idea of what that wind's going to do, how it's going to shift, and then what the air temperature is going to be, and cloud cover. So cloud cover is pretty light. I want them to look at sea temp. So sea temp, 15 degrees Celsius, that's not too bad. But if it's 12 degrees and 15 degrees Celsius and you get wet and you're wearing a t-shirt and swimsuit, you have the risk of hypothermia. So, and then we get them to look at tides. Water quality is usually for bacteria. Look at the tides to see how is this going to impact our launching and landing. So with this information, we can start making some best guesses. What are we expecting for our waves? Because waves are going to impact our chances of going in or not, falling in. So we want to know, what is the risk? Is it increased that we're going to fall in, or are we going to be pretty stable? If it's really windy and cool day with a lot of cloud cover, then we want to start looking at what are we going to wear. We're probably going to have to be in some wetsuits and stuff, because if somebody gets wet and they're out on their board for another hour, you know, we're running the risk of mild hypothermia or worse. So this is a decision-making process that I get them to start going through, that you can start going through as well when you're starting to look at what's the weather today, what's the tides today, what's the temperature going to be, is it going to be sunny, is it going to be hot, because that's going to keep me warm. So it just helps you put together what's that plan that you want to be out, what directions you might want to go, definitely what you're going to wear based on the risk of, are you going to get wet? Are you going to stay dry? Is there something to keep you warm when you're dry? So it's not to put the fear in people of, oh, it's a terrible day to go in. It's to start planning, what are you going to wear? And maybe you go in a different place where you have a break from the wind where you can get out of it. So maybe instead of Spanish Banks or Locarno, you go to, I don't know, Alder Bay, or somewhere where you're getting a break from the wind. Maybe there's a lake that you can go to that's not, the trees are going to give you shelter. So all of these things just help us put something together as to what's going to happen when we're out there. And so, yeah, quick recap. Wind, direction, speed, offshore, onshore. Is it going to change? And is it within my abilities? And when we're thinking of my abilities, think of the group's ability. We should always look at the minimum ability, the newest person in the group. A decision should be, if we're going out with a group of 5 people, the decision should be made based on the person with the least amount of skill and their abilities to keep the group safe. One person gets in trouble, whole group's in trouble. Waves, can I expect wind waves? How long has the wind been blowing? Is it going to drop and give me a better chance to go out paddling later? Tides, is it high tide, low tide? Is there going to be current because it's a huge tidal exchange? And is the current helping me or going against me? And safety. Safety is always that preparedness of, what am I going to wear? What do I need to take with me? All that kind of stuff. So yeah, lots. So this is me, West Coast SUP Adventures. Find us on Instagram, West Coast SUP Adventures. There's a group on Facebook, as well as obviously the SUP Life group. If you're on Facebook, hit those up. You'll find out things that we're doing, what we have going on. We also post in, Dennis and I also post in SUP Life fan group. Community paddles we run every other week. Last night was Deep Cove. We did a gear chat. We're going to do another one in 2 weeks out of Deep Cove again. It's going to be another gear chat. Last night we talked about what to carry in your kit to help keep you safe for unexpecteds if you're going on a full day paddle. Next week, we're going to be doing some night tours, night trips, or evening paddles this week, so this year. So next week is going to be more on lighting systems, things that you have to have, and types of lights you want to consider if you are going to be out at night on your board. And considerations, because it's not always the biggest light is the best. You can go night blind or ruin your night vision if you have the wrong light. So yeah. I'll stop talking now. It's been talking for an hour and a half. Hopefully you got something out of this. It's going to take me a couple of days to get the recording to you, and I'll send you PowerPoints of the screenshots. Please ask questions. Introduce yourself if you see me out there. I always want to meet more people in the community if I don't know you already. Community paddles, all of those things. Feel free to unmute yourself at this point. Ask questions. What would you say is reasonable wind measurement would be for a beginner paddler? 15 kilometers an hour is getting pretty dicey. So 15, you're going to have challenges standing. It's going to create some ripple if you're still at that stage of getting comfortable standing. Probably going to be on knees more. So lower is better, unless you can find an area where you can get out of the wind, find a wind shadow. So look at Google Maps, depending. So my advanced course is at Barnett Marine Park in Burnaby on Saturday. And we start, and there's a fairly open channel, but if the wind's coming out of the west, I take everyone across the channel, because it also gets them to paddle a little bit further. And there's a little covey area that we can get out of the wind and do skills and be right out of the wind and take a break. So use Google Maps, ask other people who paddle, come out to the community paddles, because there's people there with experience and there's new people there. Nobody's going to feel like you're holding them up. Nobody's going to feel like, here they come again. Everyone is always happy to help, and we'll give you advice on locations. Does wind generally affect inflatable SUPs more than hardboards? Yes. Also, how much does the board shape matter? For example, would inflatable touring or race board handle wind better than an all-arounder? My board has 2 side fins. My wife's board has a single fin, so I'm curious. Yeah, lots of great questions. Let me open, I'm still sharing the screen, right? Yes, okay. So number 1, inflatables, yes, they do worse in the wind because they're 6 inches high mostly, and they're sitting on top of the water, so that 6 inches acts like a sail. Wind blows from the side, harder to keep the board going straight. When it comes to board shape, let's do a general search. SUP. Oops. When it comes to shape, an all-rounder looks like a stretched out surfboard. Don't always do as well in the wind. They're super fun boards. They're super fun on waves, but an all-rounder, let me try one with rocker. Rocker on a board is when the nose rocks up. So here's the picture. So here, this is the rocker on this board. Looks kind of like an eye rocker. So there's a flat part of the board. This is inflatable. It's thicker. Nose rocks up. Makes it easier to turn, more maneuverable. But if you're going straight into a wind, the wind gets under that nose and keeps blowing it to the side. So the rocker on the board can make it trickier to paddle into the wind. If the wind's coming from the side, effect is all from the width of the board. If you go to a race board, generally it depends. Race boards used to not have rocker, so that they would cut into the water and just fly. It was more of a V-hull, like V'd into the water. And they tracked really, really well, but they were really hard to turn. More often than not, race boards, touring boards. So I have a new touring board this year. It has a gentle rocker in it to help with turning. They don't get as much wind effect as the general all-around board, but they generally do have some rocker in them to make them easier to turn. So there is going to be some windage or some knockoff there. If you have a hull that is right on the board, right on the water, it's going to track really well. There's always pros and cons. So inflatable touring race board handle better. With the race board, so if it's still inflatable at 6 inches, so you're still going to have more windage or more effect. But depending on that nose, the rocker will depend on how much the wind is going to affect it or knock it off. And it's usually a tracking issue when the wind comes up. For fins, so some boards have 3 fins, some have 2 fins, some have 1 fin. The fin's job is to create surface area so that when you take a paddle stroke, the tail doesn't slide sideways through the water. It also creates resistance and more stability. So from a side-to-side point of view, that fin helps the board not rock as much. So the more surface area is going to track better, and it's going to be more stable. So 2 fins might be better, but if it's 2 4-inch fins as opposed to 1 10-inch deep fin, they might be kind of the same. So it's a surface area thing, and it is also the more fins you put on, it creates a tiny bit more drag and can slow them down a little bit. It's going to be pretty negligible, especially when we're new. We're not going to notice, but there's a potential for that. So it's not usually as much how many, it's the surface area that's created. Most of my boards have 1. Inflatables often have 2 or 3. Inflatables, because of that effect that the wind has when it blows onto them, blows on that thick rail, the side, they need more surface area to help them track. Hopefully that answers your question. Can you please post apps or links for tides and wind? Yeah, so I'll flip over to Windy here. I use windy.com. This is my favorite go-to wind app. It has tons of features, but if you stick to just looking at winds and those, and the things we talked about, Windy app, I can post this in our group. There's tide apps. There's all sorts of different ones. This is my favorite just because I'm visual and I like pictures. So yeah, I'll post those in the group probably at the same time that I send the email out. How do you measure when slack tide is? So slack tide, if you look at the screen share here, slack tide is going to be on either side of the high or low. So the tide never actually becomes slack and doesn't move. It's always coming up to changing and then back. But it's usually, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, depending on what the exchange is, maybe a half hour on either side, where it's going to be calmer. There's measurements that you can look at when we get into especially touring level 2, where the further you go, the faster it gets, and then it starts slowing down. You can actually see where it's going to be by some general calculations. But generally within, half hour other side, depending on the exchange, it's going to be calmer. When convection happens as the land heats up, is the wind typically onshore, offshore? Depends on the shape. So if you were at Jericho, and heat is going to be rising from the shore, generally it's westerly already, so it's usually onshore. What happens when it turns to offshore is as the land starts cooling, that breeze can start moving the other way. So often it's more offshore. So winds created by convection only are generally more onshore. When it's hot and as the day cools, they go offshore, but that can also be modified based on, if there's a lot of trees, a lot of structures can change the shape of the wind, and if there's any other pre-existing weather patterns that are moving through as well. So it's not always that straightforward, but it's kind of, you can use that as a general measure. Great, thank you. I have specific questions. What sites do you use to get info on Pitt Lake, Widgeon Creek? And what do you think are ideal conditions to get to Widgeon Falls? So I don't have any specific sites. If you look at the tides in New Westminster, add a couple hours to it, and that'll get you roughly Widgeon between 2 and 3 hours. Crossing Pitt River at slack-ish tide is good. If you cross at halfway through a tide, you're going to have much more flow. So the challenge with Pitt is the river and the lake is they're tidal. So tides are going to affect it. So it's mostly a tidal thing. The more water, the better when you're crossing the river, because as you get lower, there's little structures down there. It can cause a little bit more current, but you don't want to cross it right at the middle of an exchange, because that's going to be the fastest. And of course, there we have boats to consider, because a lot of fishing boats are coming in and out. So if you add, between 2 to 3 hours to New Westminster tide, that's going to end you up in kind of that tidal range. If you do the Marsh Loop tour with us, that's one of we call it a beginner tour. So the beginner tours we do 3 river tours: Marsh Loop, Whistler, and then Harrison. So we call it a beginner tour. It's a very accessible tour. You're on the board for maybe 10 kilometers, I guess. You're going to get a little bit of wind, but you also get a bit of a lazy river ride. So it's a good first longer day. And we also show you how to cross the river, and we'll talk a little bit about tides. So I know if you're in Natasha's group, we're setting up a one for her or for your group in August. That's a good one to jump into. And if you're uncertain about abilities and what you should be able to do, we do want you to be able to self-rescue if possible, get back on your board by yourself. And paddling standing and having comfort paddling standing is good. You're on the water for 4 to 5 hours. That's too long to be on your knees, and you can't do it paddling sitting down. So it's one to consider, and it kind of helps you with the navigating pit. Going up to the falls, it's really nice. It's a nice walk once you're at the falls. Coming back, you will run into some headwind. That's just kind of how it goes. But take your time or come back a little bit later in the day. We have 2 community events planned. One of them is Widgeon Falls and like a paddle and hike. That one's July, I think. Yeah, so July 18th, it's in our West Coast SUP group. July 18th, we're guiding a free Widgeon Falls paddle for the day. Picnic, paddle, all that kind of stuff. And June 21st, Father's Day, we're going to do a beach barbecue or beach potluck in the afternoon. So Dennis and I are going to go out and do some crabbing in the morning, bring some crabs back. Y'all can show up at noon, bring some food, and we'll share it, get to meet more people. So definitely come to those. All right. Regarding what you're sharing with higher wind challenges in regards to inflatable boards, you're discussing 6-inch boards. What about a 4.75 inflatable? Does it make much of a difference? Absolutely. Thinner board, I always prefer, I'm only 5'6". If I cannot be on a 6-inch board, I will go on a 4.75. Windshire at Jericho Sailing Center, they have they are all red paddle boards, and the board they have is the thinner board. So that is always my preference for a rider who's not bigger, taller, body shape, all those kinds of things. Thinner board, so the thickness contributes to stiffness, makes the board stiffer so it doesn't flex as much when the water gets a little bit ripply. So when you go thinner, unless they've built other features into the board, a little bit thinner means a little bit less capacity sometimes. So it depends on the manufacturer and what they've done, but thinner is better. It's also easier to get back on. A 6-inch board is really hard to get back on because you have to launch yourself up and onto it. For 4.75 or in that range, it's just a little bit thinner, a little bit easier to get on. So does it make much difference? I have this one. And my husband has this one. Let me have a quick look. So Nomad XL. $10-foot long, 32 inches wide, 475. And then the XL, 11 feet long, 32 wide, 6 inches. So different things. So different lengths. Longer, it's going to get more capacity, 32 inches across the middle. It's going to make it more stable. So usually an 11-foot board will be 32. 6 inches means more capacity. So that's why it has the 400-pound capacity mark on it. It's going to catch more winds. It's going to be a little bit harder to get back on, but it's going to be a more stable board overall. 10-foot, Still a good length, getting a little bit on the shorter side. 32 wide makes it nice and stable. So you can see the difference. They rate it at 250 pounds max. So depending on height and all those differences between you and your husband, they're probably fine. 10 doesn't glide as much, so you're going to have to work a little harder on your board than the 11, but yours is going to be easier to get back on. You mentioned you use Google Maps for wind. Oh, no, for land contours, just to see land. So Google Maps would be, if I open Google Maps here, just to see where, if the wind was howling down, where might I be able to get out of it? So I mentioned Belcarra, so, or sorry, not Belcarra, Barnett Marine Park. So when I do my lessons here, we launch from here, we're kind of in this area, and if it's really windy, it just howls down here midday. So I paddle over here to this little area because it gives us a windbreak of the wind point coming straight across. So I would use Google Maps to get an idea of land formations where maybe we can get out of the wind a bit in an area that I don't know, or ask somebody. How do you know if a wind is onshore or offshore? If you're standing on the beach and the wind's blowing in your face in the water and the wind's blowing in your face, it means it's basically blowing to shore. That's onshore. If it's offshore, it's blowing from your back out. So you can look at the direction or just stand there and feel the direction that the wind's blowing. A really good way to identify that is flags. Flags are your best friend on a paddleboard. Flags are going to give you an idea of direction, easy to see wind changes, and if they're standing straight out, it's probably about a 15-kilometer-hour wind. If they're just kind of luffing and hardly moving at all, it's a light wind. Jericho Sailing Center, they have a Canadian flag right on the top. I do lessons there, and I'm watching that flag all the time to see, is the wind changing, because I can see it there usually before I can feel it on my face. Where do you find the info on the community event in Widgeon or in July? It's in the SUP Life fan group and in the West Coast SUP group, Facebook groups. Natasha probably has it too. I'm not posted it yet. She knows about it for sure. But if you are in those groups, go to the event pages and they're 100% listed there. And that's where we'll be doing a lot of the updates. If you're on our newsletter, you'll get updates about it as well there. I found I really struggle to get back on my board when I have my life jacket on. Yes, I have a Mustang Destiny Women's life jacket. I might be using the wrong terminology. Life jacket versus PFD. Yeah, most of them are PFDs, but I know what you mean. I wanted to have a type that flips you back upright if you go unconscious as well. Is that Mustang Women's Destiny? Yeah, because a life jacket will right you if you're unconscious, but probably 90. This one, that's a PFD, I'm pretty sure. You don't see many life jackets for adults. The big keyhole ones that you get on the cruise ships, that's a life jacket because the shape, it floats you up. Some life jackets will have less flotation in the back so that you have a tendency for it to float you up. But unless there's a pillow behind your head, it's not going to hold your head out of the water. The inflatable ones, the little hip ones that go around the hips, not that I recommend those really, really strongly, but when you put them on, they're a life jacket, so they hold your head up. Wanted to have the type that flips you back if you go unconscious, as well as good range of motion for paddling. However, not realizing I can't remount my board while I'm in it. I wonder if I have a better suggestion for me. I'm considering running clinic on getting back on your board and just trying to come up with different alternative methods. It generally comes down to technique. Some of the paddles or some of the PFDs are quite thick in the front. The thicker it is, the harder it is to get back on. So when we have an inflatable paddleboard, you've got that 6-inch thickness up out of the water. You can't grab it and pull yourself on it. You basically got to kick your legs as hard as you can to launch yourself up and get your life jacket on the deck of the board, and then shimmy, flop, and flip to get onto it. Another strategy is that as you're kicking, put one hand on the side of the board and push down as hard as you can to help launch yourself, and then grab the handle and push. So it usually comes down to finding a technique, maybe finding a tool that helps you, or going to a PFD that has a very thin profile. And the only one that I really know like that is the Chimera, which is pretty expensive. Yeah, go ahead. Let's see if I can find it. Sports Check had their Mustang jackets on sale. I think they're clearing them out, so they've got some really good deals on. But finding a jacket that is thinner in the front helps with the getting on the board. Chimeras are generally over 250. They're the ones that has some flotation, but it also has the cartridge for inflating. Where is it? Inflatables. I don't think it's under here. Oh, this one. So they're quite a bit more. I think they're 189 at Sports Check if they have any left, but it's thinner on the front, so less to get caught on the side of the board. But I would suggest working with trying to find a technique to get on first before you invest a couple $100 in a new life jacket. I took the intro stand-up paddle board. Oops, that's you, and that was more. Oh, thank you. Perfect. Yeah, and take the class, come to the community paddles, and keep building on those skills. If you come to the class, I'm going to tell you, go to the community paddles, because you will get more confidence the more you do it, and you get the confidence of the group, and everybody will help everybody. Could you please take a look at the forecast for Saturday for a paddle from Bunsen Lake to North Beach, and let me know trip plan. Bunsen. What is Saturday? With Bunsen, there's not a lot of options. It's going to be blowing from the south. So what I would say is, what is it, 5 o'clock? It's going to drop. 8 o'clock, you might get a little rain drop on Saturday. If you're going to go out midday, just stay close to the south end. Don't aim for the far end unless you're going to go midday and plan on coming back towards the end of the day, because you're going to have some wind blowing in your face for sure. Bunsen is kind of a, one end to the other. You can either stay in, hang off to the side, but you're not going to go very far. But just be cautious about going to the other end midday. But it's not too bad. So 6 knots, you're looking at 12 kilometers gusting to a little over 30. So depends on the timing you're going. You're going to be better off on a morning paddle, be back on the beach by noon, or an evening paddle, or you're going to have a little bit of work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Will there be community paddles somewhere towards Fraser Valley? I don't know. We generally stick more to Vancouver, North Vancouver area. I'm not sure where there are that many to go. I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to see. If you want to suggest some in one of the groups, please feel free, because you might be more familiar with some of the areas than myself as well.
Hey, Drew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about getting back on your board.
Yes.
So I saw a video a few months ago with a guy who had a strap.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he connected the strap to the middle handle.
Yep, 100%. That's a good tool.
And then made a long piece, and then made a little loop for your foot, and then you just post yourself up that way.
Yep.
Does that even work? I don't know.
100%. Okay. So I have a friend who uses that all the time. Yeah, it's the trick is getting the playing around with it to get the rope length right. carabiner or something to tie it so it goes on quickly to the handle, because you need to have the length that hangs over a hoop in it. You can put your foot in. If it's too long, you don't get enough of a boost. But if it's too high, you've got to push yourself so high out of the water, it's not accessible. So it's a matter of playing around with it a little bit when it gets warmer. So that is an option. Another option is, I always encourage people, especially if you paddle with a buddy, a fairly consistent paddle buddy, learn how to help each other get back on the board. Because getting somebody else, if you time it right, somebody who's trying to get on the board and struggling, somebody else, when they kick, who just pulls on the shoulder straps of the jacket, can often make the difference between an inch or two of first getting on, and then it's just rotating. But definitely the strap is a tool that I would say play with. And then pushing down on the board as you're coming up, because it's usually at that point sometimes a little bit of shoulder strength or upper body strength to get that push. So a combination of the things. One thing I talk to a lot of my students about is, especially when there's trouble standing, we get super tight hips from sitting so much. Tight hips, tight ankles, tight feet that don't like to bend. The more you can do on shore for mobility, it gets easier on the board. So stretching and all that, even before you go out, is always a good idea. And if you're having trouble standing, if anyone here is, I always tell people, take a yoga mat, put a piece of tape in the middle as your board handle, and kneel down on it and stand. See what your body does when you're not worried about the challenge of the board moving underneath you. See how your hips move. See where your feet want to land. Is the challenge that your knee doesn't want to come up high enough? And then we can play around with different ways to make that work. So practice the move on land, because if we take out the challenge of unstable board, you can really focus on how's my body moving. Cool. All right, everyone. Any more questions? Cool. All right. Well, thanks for going. Thanks for hanging out so long. It was a long one. I know it was a lot to listen to. Take what you can. Remember what you can. Next time you go out, ask questions. Flip through the notes. I'll send out the preparedness sheet that I had as well, so you have that as that reference point of reminding you that thought process. And hope to see you all out on the water soon. See you at a community paddle or lesson or somewhere. All right. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone.